You're watching the lesson titled Power CLI Concepts. This is part of the VMware vSphere Power CLI training course. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the support matrix for Power CLI. I'll explain to you how the versions of Power CLI and PowerShell and vSphere tie together. We'll talk a little bit about the vSphere object model. I'll tell you what I mean by that shortly. I'm going to show you how to connect to vSphere and vCenter, a very important skill to have. And we're going to go into an overview of the different commandlets that are available in Power CLI. Now, Power CLI is based on PowerShell. Power CLI supports PowerShell version 1 or version 2. And on your workstations, you're going to need version Windows XP, SP3 or above. And on your servers, Windows Server 2003 and above. And this is just talking about where you'll be running Power CLI or PowerShell. Note that version 2 of PowerShell ships with Windows 7 and Server 2008. Power CLI itself is available for downloading from VMware, as we talked about before, and it works with ESX or ESXi version 3 and above. Works with vCenter VI3 and above. And it is, for the most part, forwards and backwards compatible. ESXi, the free version, is only partially supported. You can perform read-only operations, but if you want to make changes such as creating a new virtual machine, you must have a licensed vCenter product. Yeah, the small text at the bottom says, "Not valid where prohibited, while supplies last, may cause irritability and drowsiness, and do not taunt Happy Fun Ball." So, the point that I want to make there is that forwards and backwards compatible for now, as I know it today. Caveat emptor, your mileage may vary, and by design, at least from what I've seen so far, this should continue to be the case. But it is definitely possible that if VMware were to, for example, introduce large breaking changes with their application programming interface with version 5 of vSphere, well, all bets are off, and maybe we'll have to be a new version of Power CLI to talk to it. But for right now, if you grab version 4.11 of Power CLI, you can use it to manage an ESX3 system. If you even went to the archive download section of VMware and grabbed Power CLI version 1, you would be able to connect to a vSphere 4 system and manage it. Now you're going to have a lack of functionality of some of the newer stuff that had been released, but it should work. And this is a pretty good policy by VMware. I'm glad that they've done that. And so far, I've not seen many issues where there are incompatibilities. Now, that's specifically talking about vSphere. It doesn't necessarily apply to any other VMware product. So if, for example, VMware Update Manager, they have some commandlets, they are very tightly coupled to the version of the snap-in to manage the version of VMware Update Manager. So I'm on this slide, I'm only talking about Power CLI proper that is used to manage vSphere. Okay, so we talked about this slide before, and what I want to explain to you is that in PowerShell, everything is an object. So even if you're looking at a screen full of text, it's not just text, it's a string object. But everything in Power CLI, accordingly, is also an object. You have a couple different pieces to work with here. We have managed objects and we have automation objects. The managed objects are a server-side view of a vSphere object. Now, these include managed entities, which I would say they're kind of like the first-class citizens, the most important pieces, such as virtual machine, host system, resource pool, data store. And managed objects are very complex, and they're meant to be used by developers when writing software against the vSphere API. And there is a full software development kit with hundreds of pages of documentation with details about these managed objects. Now, Power CLI will allow you to obtain a view of these managed objects, and you can work with the complex server-side view of all this level of detail. However, that's not the intent of Power CLI. When you're doing that, you're basically doing so out of necessity, not because that is the first way to go. And this is contrasts to how you would do things with the vCLI system, where it only has the ability to view the managed objects. However, something new to PowerCLI is the automation object concept. You might hear them called some other names, but this is a name that I coined. And these are an abstraction of one or more managed objects. They have a simplified interface. By that I mean that there are no methods to invoke. There is usually there's going to be a different name for the property, something that makes more sense. I mean, PowerShell is made for administrators, not for developers. So accordingly, automation objects are geared towards something that the VI admin can work with. So they're organized to match the vSphere client, so that when you pull up a vSphere client and you look at the hardware in a virtual machine, the names of the hardware pieces should correspond roughly to the types of things that you see in your PowerCLI session. As a result, because of this level of abstraction, it is possible, although not a general rule, it's possible that performance can be slower when you're working with these managed objects. Okay, I'm going to talk about connecting to vSphere and vCenter. First of all, I want to explain that we're talking about two different concepts here, vSphere and vCenter. You can connect to either or both or multiples of each of them at the same time. The method to do so is the same. You're going to use the connect VI session commandlet, which I'll demonstrate here for you shortly. Now, the way that you get started is you open a PowerCLI console or a regular PowerShell console, and to get PowerShell to work with our PowerCLI snap-in, you would type add ps snap-in vmware.vimautomation.core. And once you've either opened your PowerCLI console or your PowerShell console and added the snap-in, you can then connect to your environment using Connect VI Server. As an example, Connect VI Server -server, and then follow in the name of, for example, in this case, this is my vCenter server hostname. By default, Connect VI Server will attempt to use pass-through authentication. So this means it's a bit of a single sign-on. You don't have to type in your username and password for your vCenter system. That will only work, obviously, if you're logged in using credentials which match what are on your vCenter server. And generally speaking, this is not going to work at all when you're connecting directly to a vSphere server, because then we're talking about Unix accounts, not a Windows domain account. But when you're coming from Windows and you're on the same domain and your vCenter is set up in an intelligent fashion, well, it should just work. So that's really convenient. You don't have to specify additional username and password credentials. If it fails, you're prompted for credentials, and you can always specify credentials manually at any time with the options on the Connect VI Server commandlet. It's not hard to do at all. So once this connection is established using Connect VI Server, it will stay alive. So there's actually a web server that's being contacted in the background, and occasionally, I don't recall the time period off the top of my head, but there is a keep alive that's sent so that the connection remains alive. So you could literally leave it open for days, and you would still be able to return information about your vCenter without having to log in again. And don't forget, very important and very cool, useful feature that is relatively recent to PowerCLI. I think it came with version 4. You can connect to multiple vCenter servers. So this is something that you couldn't do until recently with vCenter with the advent of the linked mode. But the ability to connect to multiple vCenter servers is really handy, and you can imagine how it would be nice to be able to get, for example, reporting information about your multiple, maybe you have multiple data centers, and you want to get an indication of the health of your sites. Well, you could do that in one session in PowerCLI. Okay, so let me bring up a console, and I will show you how to connect to vCenter. Okay, here is my PowerCLI console. It is a brand new one. You can see the text at the top, the help text, which shows you some of the different commands available. And right there at the top is Connect VI Server. So let's run that right now. Okay, so I've got, let's see, 192.168.1.20. That's my vCenter IP address. And I'm going to just hit Enter. and it connected right away, and it used the pass-through authentication. Alternately, I could do, let's connect to one of my virtual ESX servers. Now, I'm actually going to do two of them simultaneously, and I'm going to use, okay, so what I did was I've got two IP addresses. Names would work equally well. I just don't have a DNS set up the way that I want to in my lab right now. So what I can do is type two IP addresses, separate them by commas, and since they're strings as opposed to integers or floating point numbers, since they're strings, I do have to enclose them in quotes in this case. So also, this is not going to work. It's going to prompt me for authentication because my ESX servers don't use my Windows authentication. So I'm going to cancel, and I'm going to show you what I like to do instead of specifying credentials that way. And you can see the error messages there showing that it didn't work. I'm going to say $cred equals get credential. Now, what this does is pop up your window. I can type my root. Now, $cred contains the user information that I need. So I'm going to go hit up arrow a couple times and type in -credential, $cred, hit enter, and now that connection is established. Now, I want to show you how you can view which virtual center servers and ESX servers you're connected to. A couple different ways. If you look up at the top of this title bar, you can see connected to 3 servers. And you can see the IP addresses there of all 3 of them as I had typed them in. There's another way you can examine a variable in PowerShell, and this is something that the PowerCLI will maintain this variable. It's called default VI servers. Server and servers. There's 2 of them. Default VI server contains the most recent connection that you made. Default VI servers, plural, will contain a server entry for each of the servers to which you're connected. So what happens is when you run any command contained within PowerCLI, such as, I don't know, get data center, it's going to run that against every single server connection. Or you can manually specify them if you want. So this particular example is not going to do much. It's only going to return one data center because that's all I have. But anyway, that's how you can connect to your virtual data center. Oh, make a liar out of me. It returned the built-in data center object, which is, generally speaking, hidden. You don't really see this in the VI client, but it's there all the time. So as you can see, it returned information from both my 2 ESX servers individually and my vCenter server. Same thing if I were to type in get VM, I would get more information. And probably should see some duplication here. Yeah, we do. So what happened was I've got several of these virtual machines which are on ESX Server 1, several virtual machines which are on ESX Server 2, and then you're going to see a combined list which is coming from vCenter. So this isn't a typical situation where you would do this. Normally you're going to connect to multiple servers. You're going to connect to distinct sets. My lab is not definitely not a typical production environment. And if you want to close that connection off, you can do so using disconnect VI server. You can enter a server name explicitly. You can just say asterisk, and it'll say, are you sure? I'm going to say A for yes to all, and is disconnected from all of my vCenter servers. Okay, let's talk about the range of commandlets available with PowerCLI. On the top left here, we've got inventory and reporting. This deals with things like exporting data from your virtual infrastructure, creating reports. We have deployment and configuration. This is the ability to build a new environment, configure existing objects. Maintenance and operations, just talking about lifecycle operations. Think about powering up, powering down virtual machines and hosts, implementing changes to your environment. Then we have the segment of troubleshooting and problem resolution. And this is where you're performing diagnostics or analyzing performance. PowerCLI includes commandlets for working with all of these different segments. First, let's talk about inventory and reporting. PowerShell, everything is based on the concept of a commandlet, and commandlets have verbs and nouns. And the get verb is used to retrieve objects or retrieve information from somewhere. In this case, for PowerCLI, we're talking about retrieving information from vCenter, but it could be anything. If you're thinking about retrieving information about files on your hard drive, retrieving information about anything from anywhere. That's what the get verb is about. So, for example, PowerCLI, get-vm. That's going to be a one that you'll use a lot. Some other examples, get cluster, get virtual switch, and many more. So there's actually dozens and dozens of these things, all that start with get, and they all achieve a similar purpose, which is to pull information out of vCenter. Under the badge of deployment and configuration, here are 3 different verbs which are related to this area. We have add, which allows you to add, append, or attach an entity to a resource, such as the add content commandlet. Now this definition is coming straight from Microsoft. This is not something that VMware came up with. This is a standardized set of definitions that PowerShell itself is great at applying consistently across all these different commandlets from different vendors. So the opposite of add obviously is going to be remove. New is something you would use to create a new resource in a container, such as the new object commandlet. And then set is used to set the elements of a resource. Here are some specific examples to PowerCLI. For example, add. I would use add VM host to add virtual machine hosts or ESX servers to my vCenter environment. Add pass-through device or add VM host NTP server. This is all talking about adding an entity to a resource. Under new, we have new-vm. That's going to be creating a new virtual machine, obviously. It's pretty straightforward. New virtual switch, new folder, and all these are examples of creating a new resource in a container. And then under set, we have examples such as set VM host, set CD drive, or set VM host firewall exception. And these allow you to set the elements of a resource, otherwise known as configuring. So set VM host is going to allow you to change information about your VM host. Set CD drive is allow you to modify a virtual machine's CD drive, and so forth. Under the heading maintenance and operations, we have several different verbs which apply here. I'll read some of these definitions. We have move, allows you to move a resource from one container to another. Remove is to remove a resource from a container, such as the remove item commandlet. We have restart. This is used to terminate an existing activity and start it again with the same configuration. A perfect example for this one is going to be restart a virtual machine. Then we have start and stop and spend. Move, for example, moving a resource from one place to another. You can move a VM from one place to another, and that's also known as vMotion in VMware. Here's some examples from some of the above verbs. We have move VM, move folder, move VM host, and move cluster. Remove VM host account, remove snapshot, remove hard disk. And then virtual machine, start, stop, restart, and suspend. A lot of these make sense. Once you get the hang of how the verbs work, it's just tying these nouns, which you already know and understand because you know the domain, tying them together. And it all makes sense pretty well once you get the hang of the terminology. And here's a couple examples for VApp. If you've ever worked with virtual appliances, you can start them and stop them using commandlets included with PowerCLI. Under troubleshooting and problem resolution, we have the ability to perform diagnostics with things like get log type, get VI event, and get task. A get log, for example, this is used to retrieve log entries. So you could grab a VM kernel file, or you could grab a VPXD log file. Those are just a couple examples. Get log type is used for working with that as well. Get VI event and get task. These are used to get information about changes that have happened within your vCenter environment. So everything, for example, that you see at the bottom of your vSphere client about whenever you power on a virtual machine or create a snapshot, and it's got a time and date and it's got a username, those appear under get task. You can use the get stat commandlet to analyze the performance of your system and you can read all the statistics, the vast store of statistics that you can obtain just like you can do from the vSphere client. So for example, if you wanted to check out the average memory usage over a period of time, you could do that using PowerCLI. Now I'm going to show you an example of going into the PowerShell console to view all the available commands and work with some of them. I have my PowerShell console up now, and one of the first things you see here at the top is to find out what commands are available, type get vi command. So let's do that right now. And I hope you are reading as that scrolled by, because I'm not going to repeat that for you. I'm just kidding, of course. So if I page up, oh wow, there's a lot of these things. Let's see, you can see at the top here we've got headings, command type, name, and definition. And the name here is referenced to the commandlet. So there are a lot of them. Let me show you a couple of ways to break this down and then get more information about them. This list of several hundred here is pretty intimidating. So let's see what we can do to break it down. First of all, I'm going to pipe this to measure object. And that's going to tell us that the count, there's 258 of them. Now this has gone up over time, and at the time of this recording, we've got 258 commandlets. I think they started out with something on the order of 120. So they have, it's definitely grown. Each commandlet is a sort of a bite-sized, task-oriented piece of programming which allows you to peek or poke in your vCenter environment. And if you want to get a handle on what these things do, one way to do that is to, let's take get vi command and pipe it to group object. Now I'm going to group them by the, let's try by the verb. The verb of a commandlet is the portion that happens before the dash, such as in this example, wait. Wait is going to be the verb. So what I've done here is use the group object commandlet to bundle everything up by the verb in this case. So we've got, for example, 3 commandlets which have add. 81 of them have a get verb, and so on. So you can see how they're broken down. I could even sort by count. And we can see that by far we've got more get commandlets than anything else, followed by set, remove, and new, and the rest of them just onesie twosies. So I hope that this helps you see a little bit more about the type of commandlets available. Now let's kind of do the reverse here. Instead of grouping by verb, let's group by noun. Now this is a pretty fat list here, and I think I'm going to sort it by name. Still pretty big. Now I think what I'm going to do is going to pipe that to format wide. Okay, I could even maybe do a third column. Okay, now we've got a pretty concise list of nouns. Okay, so we see a big giant list of nouns. How does this help us? Okay, what I want you to get a picture of is just imagine what some of these things can do. Some of them are going to be more obvious than others, obviously, but if you kind of get a feel of the lay of the land, this will help you out when realizing what types of operations you can do. For example, folder. Okay, if we look at the vSphere client, you know what a folder is, right? In fact, we've got a couple different kinds of folders. We have the blue ones and the yellow ones. I think most people more commonly work with the blue folders under the VMs and templates view. And so there are commandlets for working with folders. Okay, let's take another example, data store. So there are commandlets for working with data stores. And obviously, the data stores are where you store the data for your virtual machines. And you're going to find example after example of a lot of these commandlets which make sense. The meaning for them is obvious. And it's really, start slow, get the handle on what type of commandlets are out there. And don't forget, there's get vi command. And what this does is place all these at your fingertips. And this is actually sort of an alias to PowerShell's built-in get command. Get command looks like this, and it can do many of the same things except that it is expanded for use with all PowerShell commandlets, as opposed to get vi command, which is a subset for managing only the PowerCLI commandlets. Either one works for the same purpose. So for example, I can say get command star VM script, and I can have access to this particular commandlet. Also, while I'm here, I want to mention the built-in help that PowerShell has. It's great stuff. So you could say help new-vm, hit enter, and you're going to get screens of information about working with these things. And you can see here, see the examples, type get help new VM dash examples. I can just copy, paste, and there we go. There's a lot of information in here that helps you work with PowerCLI. Back to the slides, we find that we are actually at the end of this lesson. I want to do a little review. We first talked about the support matrix, and I showed you what types of, what versions of what were compatible with what. Generally speaking, we're talking about PowerShell versions 1 and 2, and PowerCLI, just grab the latest version and it should work with whatever's in your environment. We talked about the vSphere object model and the managed objects versus automation objects. Then I showed you how to connect to vSphere and vCenter. And then we broke down the commandlets and into different categories, and I showed you several examples of each. And we had that demonstration. I showed you how to work with get vi command.